This was an act of terrorism. It was premeditated and an evil act.
On Thursday morning, FBI Deputy Assistant Director Christopher Rea spoke at a press conference. He was telling the public what the FBI knows about an attack in New Orleans in the early hours of New Year's Day.
This was obviously a critical incident, and with that, lots of information and tips come pouring in from law enforcement, first responders, and the public. We have been aggressively running down these tips and information. As you all know, that takes time, and we will continue to do so until every lead has been followed through on.
Here's what we know. A man drove a rented pickup truck into a crowd of people celebrating the new year on Bourbon Street. The FBI has identified him as Shamsuddin Jabbar, an American Army veteran from Texas. There was an ISIS flag in his vehicle. Jabbar killed at least 14 people and injured at least 35 others. Then, in a shootout with responding officers, he was killed too. Earlier today, I sat down with my colleague Perry Stein, who has been reporting on this.
I cover the Justice Department and FBI for the Washington Post, so I report on all sorts of investigations, the agency itself, and unfortunately when there's big attacks like this, I often am the person seeing what federal law enforcement is doing in these investigations.
Perry says the FBI believes that Jabbar acted alone. The incident is being investigated as an act of terrorism. From the newsroom of the Washington Post, this is Post Reports. It's Thursday, January 2nd. I'm Rachel Siegel. I'm your guest host. Today, what we know about an attack in New Orleans and the questions law enforcement is asking about its connection to ISIS. So, Perry, I think a lot of us, and this happened to me, woke up on New Year's Day to see headlines about a truck that crashed into people on Bourbon Street who had been celebrating that night. Can you walk me through what happened on New Year's?
Yeah, what we know is around 3:15 a.m., a man took his truck and ran through a crowd of people on Bourbon Street. After that, this person got out of the car. There was some sort of shootout with police. 2 police officers were shot. And at that shootout, we know that the attacker was pronounced dead.
What you're describing obviously sounds horrific. What have bystanders said about what it was like to see something like that?
I was just reading, one of my colleagues reported that a friend of the victims, they heard gunshots and they ran and then they never found their friend. So I'm just reading witness reports. It was chaotic and scary for those who were there.
Perry, can you tell me a little bit more about what we know so far about the attacker, Shamsuddin Jabbar?
We know he's an Army veteran. We know that he was born in the U.S. He was deployed to Afghanistan, but he was not in a combat position. My understanding, he was in some sort of IT, HR position. People interviewed have said that, nothing stood out about him. We reported that he was discharged after he was caught while driving while intoxicated on an Army base. And since then has been working on real estate and in other jobs, I believe.
In Texas, right?
In Texas.
Okay. And from what law enforcement has said, what do they know about a motive or any theories that they might have based on the evidence at the scene?
I think they are still piecing together every aspect that they know about this person. We know that he had an ISIS flag on him when he committed this attack, according to law enforcement. And President Biden came out as he expressed his condolences to the victims and said that law enforcement informed him that hours before the attack, the attacker posted videos on social media indicating that he was inspired by ISIS.
Expressing a desire to kill. The ISIS flag was found in his vehicle, which he rented to conduct this attack. Possible explosives were found in the vehicle as well, and more explosives were found nearby. The situation is very fluid, and the investigation has a preliminary stage.
After the break, what an ISIS-inspired terrorist attack means in 2025. We'll be right back. Perry, I want to talk about ISIS a little bit more. It feels like we haven't heard about the group as much recently. Can you walk me through the basics of what ISIS itself believes?
So we know ISIS is the extremist military arm of the Islamic State. And in recent years, they've shifted more to gathering more territory out in the Middle East as opposed to doing their attacks in Western countries. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that there are not attacks or plans for attacks here. Mm-hmm. And we know that federal law enforcement are concerned about radicalization of people in the U.S. from extremist groups, whether they be domestic extremist groups, ISIS. And I reported a couple months ago in late 2024 about an attack that the FBI says they thwarted. This was an adult male living in America who was an Afghan national who had plans to carry out an attack on Election Day in the United States. And then the month before that, there was another apparently a thwarted attack from a Canadian person who had a plan to do an attack in the U.S. on the anniversary of the October 7th attack of Israel. So, I think that ISIS is a group and potential radicalization of people here is on the minds of law enforcement and something that they are tracking.
Okay. And do you have a sense then of what this incident could mean for public safety now? I know the mayor of New Orleans spoke about this at a press conference today, too.
I want to reassure the public that the city of New Orleans is not only ready for game day today, but we're ready to continue to host large-scale events in our city because we are built to host at every single turn.
And Perry, how do you think law enforcement is thinking about security right now, today for the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans or zoomed out for the country more broadly?
Yeah, I think that it is still really too early to tell, right, how this will play out. But we know whenever there is an attack, right now this is being investigated as a terror attack. We know, just by definition, that is meant to spread terror in this country. So I think that you will see law enforcement trying to make people safe. They're already talking about that in New Orleans. Right? There's supposed to be what we call bollards up to block people from driving through these things. In New Orleans, they have a bunch of big events. They got Mardi Gras, they got the Super Bowl coming up, and they had been in the middle of replacing them, which is why apparently that there was an opening. Yeah. And so I think you're going to see people we're seeing real questions about safety protocols for these big events and what they are doing. Unfortunately, we know this drill pretty well here. When there are these mass attacks, there's questions about security. But I do think that, if we were to be interviewing right here someone from national security and the FBI, they would say their alerts are up for ISIS and how it's affecting, people here.
Has the incoming president, President Trump, said anything about this? His inauguration is just a few weeks away. Has he weighed in at all?
Yeah, so Trump, at the very beginning, as news was unfolding and we were all trying to figure out what happened, he did make a statement and he indicated that this was an illegal immigrant who drove the car across and saying, see, the criminals over there are worse than the ones here. And as we've learned, again, this was someone who was born in the U.S. So I think that spread some misinformation at first and some fear as to what happened. He has now called this an evil attack and said that it underscores, what he has been saying all the time, that crime in these cities are horrible. So I think, yes, that is how he has addressed it.
Okay. There was another attack that we haven't even gotten to yet early Wednesday morning in Las Vegas. This one a bit different when a Tesla truck exploded outside of the Trump Hotel there. Can you describe, both what we know about that incident and whether there's any sense of whether there's a connection between the two?
So we know that a man took a Tesla truck that he had been renting, and it was in front of a Trump hotel in Las Vegas. And he had what authorities have described as kind of like unsophisticated makeshift bombs in there, or homemade bombs, and it blew up. The suspect did die. The authorities just said that they believe he died of a self-inflicted gun wound right before the car blew up. And luckily, no one else was killed in this incident. So we don't know exactly what has happened. I think we know less about this one than, let's say, New Orleans right now. And we're still piecing together. They identified who rented the car and who they believe is the suspect, but this person's body was so burned that they haven't 100% ID'd this person. And this person was also an Army veteran in a rented car. So there are some similarities, and authorities did, acknowledge that yes, we understand the similarities here, but they also said that as of now, they don't see a connection between this Las Vegas and New Orleans attack.
Okay. So both with the Las Vegas incident and what happened in New Orleans, what are you watching for? What are some of the questions you're hoping get answers that would help fill in an understanding of what happened?
Right. There's two things, is what happened and what led to these attacks. I mean, I think in New Orleans, we're looking to see exactly, we know, for instance, that he said he was inspired by ISIS. Was he in contact with anyone from the group? Who knew what before leading up to the attack? Was anyone in his family expecting this? Were they surprised? So we're looking to see what his, interactions with other people had been. And same, we don't know very much about the Las Vegas motive here yet. But in terms of now preventative things, I mean, I think that what I'm sure a lot of people across the country were watching these and saying, like, my family has been to Las Vegas or Bourbon Street, or I have, and these are places that I want to go, or I'm feeling afraid to go in crowds. So we're going to look at what the FBI thinks and federal law enforcement and local law enforcement feels state of security is. Do they feel there's a higher risk? What are they doing? I mean, right now they're saying these appear to be isolated incidents, and New Orleans is saying that they're going to have a safe Mardi Gras and Super Bowl. So I think there's a lot to watch out for in terms of what led to these events and what precipitated them and what comes next.
Perry, thanks so much for joining us and walking us through what you know so far. We'll be following along.
Thank you for having me.
Perry Stein covers the FBI and the Justice Department for The Post. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. Today's show was produced by Ariel Plotnick with help from Emma Telkoff. It was mixed by Sam Baer and edited by Maggie Penman, with help from Rena Flores and Monica Campbell. I'm Rachel Siegel. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from The Washington Post.